So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Again, my name is Patrick Olive, and I am the director of OneShul. But that's kind of an inappropriate title because there really is no one who's in charge of OneShul. We're a pluralistic Jewish community online. We have live streaming Shabbat services, classes, holiday events, and other social functions. We have our prayer wall, we have our memorial wall, we have a video archive, so if you can't participate in live events, you can always watch the videos and download class notes from the archive. We have a library, and we also have a contact feature. You can contact us if you have any questions about Judaism, if you're interested in getting involved in Judaism in your area. We'd love to help you to accomplish that. We also have a Siddur that is downloadable. It's a PDF, so you can print it on your home computer. So tonight's class is Parshat Devarim, and I've titled it Battling Corruption. Battling Corruption. So you can download those notes from the chat room here. And I apologize in advance. I have a little bit of a frog in my throat. I was talking a little bit too much today. And I got to tell you a funny story. Excuse me. I actually got a comment on YouTube because all of our videos are run through YouTube after they're archived. A guy was complaining that I drink too much water during classes. So I don't know if that's something I can work on, but apparently it's something I need to do, right? Okay, anyway, Parshat Devarim. So we're starting the book of Deuteronomy, and Devarim is actually the name of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is not the name of this section of the Torah, the last book of the Torah. It's actually Devarim, which translates to words. Now, does anyone know why it's called words? So this is the part where in the chat room, it's good to be in the chat room, because you can post the answer to that. Why is Deuteronomy, Devarim, called Devarim, or words, or Devarim is actually how you pronounce it if you're trying to say it correctly. Anne responds, you talk a lot, you need to you drink all you want. Okay, well, good to know. Appreciate that. So why is the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, why do we call this whole book words? Does anyone have a sense for why that is? Okay, so the reason why this is called Devarim, words, is because basically the book of Deuteronomy is a very, very long speech. As Sarah says, it is the words of Moshe. So this is written as essentially a long speech that Moses is giving across the Jordan. So there's a little bit of speculation here about who actually wrote Deuteronomy, who wrote Devarim. And the reason why is that if Moses is writing this and is delivering this speech, he can't deliver it in Israel because he never actually went into Israel. The tricky thing is, the way that the narrative is written, it sounds like it's a narrator who's writing from the perspective who is already in Israel. So what that means is this could not have been written prior to the Israelites being in Israel. So there's a little bit of a linguistic issue there. Now, there are all kinds of commentaries that say, well, there's a way that you can work it out to where it was Moses who wrote it. Some people say Moses wrote all of it up until his death, and then Joshua wrote the rest of it. So there's a lot of different ways that people try to work that out. Contemporary scholars seem to believe that Devarim was actually written during the reign of Josiah, and that it was actually a reformative piece of literature, that the idea was that it was supposed to cement the idea of the monarchy and the priesthood and all of these other things. Now, it doesn't matter so much what you think about where this came from. It's important that we draw lessons for it. So for the entire book of Deuteronomy, we're going to do something different than what we normally do at OneShul. Normally we go through the entire Torah portion and we try to read everything, and we will do that in different classes. As a matter of fact, Sarah, who is in the chat room tonight, will probably be picking up the slack on that one. But what I want to do for Deuteronomy is I want to focus on a mitzvah. So every Torah portion in Deuteronomy has a mitzvah. So what we're going to do is we're going to isolate one mitzvah in each parsha, in each Torah portion, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what this means, what this involves, some of the history, and some of the ways that we can apply it today. So the mitzvot, the commandments that are given in Deuteronomy, have to do with judges and a righteous system of judges. So I'm going to start by reading Deuteronomy. This is chapter 1, verse 9. And I spoke unto you at that time, saying, I am not able to bear you myself alone. The Lord your God hath multiplied you, and behold, you are this day as the stars in heaven for multitude. The Lord, the God of your fathers, made you 1,000 times so many more as you are, and bless you, and he hath promised you. How can I myself alone bear your cumbrance and your burden and your strife? So basically what's happening here is that Moses is saying, God has blessed you, he has multiplied you. There are so many thousands more of you than when we started off on this journey together. I can no longer handle everything that you need in terms of the legal system. So the question I would pose in the beginning is, has this happened before? Does anyone know of a situation where Moses has had this conversation before? Maybe this is a little bit of deja vu at some point. We're starting to remember something here. Like maybe Moses has talked about this with someone at some point, or maybe this has been brought up in another portion. Does anyone have a sense for how that could be? Because that's one comment that's made frequently about Deuteronomy, is that it's basically a retelling. And Moses gives this long speech, and it's very, very repetitive in the sense that we've already dealt with all of this from Exodus through to Leviticus and Numbers. So what is this reminiscent of? This idea of judges and this idea of what makes a righteous judge, or let's not even say a righteous judge. Why do we even need judges? Right? I mean, Moses is saying why, but has this circumstance ever happened? Quiet crowd tonight. I'm very, very surprised. Come on, people. There's no interaction unless you start talking to each other. Why would it make sense that we would have? Where does this come from? Where does this conversation that Moses is having? Because clearly, I mean, Moses has been in the desert for 40 years. Birth rates back then were pretty high, so this whole multiplying thing has happened for a long time. The people have always wanted leaders, okay? So there was a specific conversation that Moses had, and he actually had it with his father-in-law, Yitro or Jethro the Midianite, and this exact same thing happened. Yitro went to Moses and said, you cannot handle the burden of all of this alone. You need to appoint judges. So Moses is the one who's in charge of this. Now, flash forward, years and years and years later, and now Moses is telling the same story again, but he's telling it a little different. What he's saying now is, God has told me that we need to have judges. And what's interesting is that he's going to say, you are responsible for picking them. So we have this transition all of a sudden from Moses being the one who's going to pick the judges to God saying that everyone else has to do it. So basically, Yitro took the burden off Moses initially by saying, you can't do this on your own. And now Moses and God have had this conversation where God says, okay, it was your responsibility to pick the judges. At first, it was your responsibility to handle everything. You had to deal with every legal case. Then Yitro told you to pick judges. Now I'm telling you, you can't even pick judges. It needs to be the people picking judges. So it's this delineation of power further and further and further. So Sarah Bas Avraham makes the point that it's God telling people to grow up. So that's an interesting analogy. I hadn't thought of it that way. But it makes great sense. It's this idea of, Moses was sort of the strong leader. And now that power and control is starting to delineate more and more and more. So it's kind of interesting how that's going to work. So verse 13 here says, "Get you from each one of your tribes wise men and understanding and full of knowledge, and I will make them heads over you." Okay, well, I'm going to read that one more time because this is very interesting. "Get you from each one of your tribes wise men," and the way that the way that Hebrew works is that there's no punctuation, so the word "and" is used over and over again. So in this case, it's wise men who are understanding and full of knowledge, and I will make them heads over you. So I want to ask this question. Let's brainstorm each of these qualities and what they mean. Are they the same? Are they different? Because to me it sounds like wise men, understanding, and full of knowledge is all kind of the same. It sounds like it's the same kind of adjective. So how could wise, understanding, and full of knowledge be different from each other? I kind of drew a blank on this one, so I'd be interested to know, what's your opinion? What do you think about this? It's because it sounds so similar. My sense is that wise, understanding, full of knowledge. Now, in Hebrew, sometimes if you want to make a point very, very strongly, you pluralize it. Or you sort of say the same thing over and over again, and it builds it up to be bigger and bigger. So we could take that perspective, and we could say that wise, understanding, and full of knowledge is basically the same thing. And that this is just Moses' way of saying these have to be the cream of the crop. We could also pick these words apart. We could say that if you're wise, it could mean that you are an older person. It could mean that you are somehow spiritually wise. Understanding could have to do not so much with knowledge, but with, let's say, a personality type. You're an understanding, empathetic type of person. And then full of knowledge could be the idea of being full of Torah knowledge. Because remember, these cases that are being settled within the Israelites, these all have to deal with halakha. These all have to deal with Jewish law. So you have to be wise, in the sense that maybe you're sage-like, understanding, in the sense that you have compassion and empathy, and full of knowledge, in the sense that you have to have actual technical skill. You have to understand technical Jewish law to be a priest at this time. Okay, so we have a few comments here. Sarah says, "I would say that a wise man has understanding and is full of knowledge." Okay, so the idea that wisdom encapsulates all of these things. Tamara says that a person can be wise but not understanding of others. So that's a really great point. And Sarah also comments, but you can be full of knowledge and not necessarily wise. Okay, so this can work in a lot of different ways, and it sounds like, it can be one thing, it can be all things. James makes the comment that spiritual wisdom would come from God. Okay, so perhaps that's what wisdom is, that wisdom is actually a spiritual component. So these are all great points. And, is there a right or wrong way of looking at this? I really don't think so. Okay, so let's move on to the next verse. And this is very long. This is actually 3 verses. "And ye answered me, and said, The thing which thou hast spoken is good for us to do." Okay, so this is the Israelites saying, okay, what you have told us to do, it's a good thing, we're going to go do it. So I took the heads of your tribes, wise men, full of knowledge, and made them heads over you, captains of thousands, and captains of hundreds, and captains of fifties, and captains of tens, and officers, tribe by tribe. And I charged your judges at that time, saying, Here are the causes between your brethren, and judge righteously between a man and his brother, and the stranger that is with him. And so this should be underlined, and it's not, unfortunately, but I want to read this last line one more time. And I charged your judges at the time, saying, Hear the causes between your brethren, and judge righteously between a man and his brother, and the stranger that is with him. So the question that I would ask is, what does this last sentence mean? What does it say about justice that Moses is saying on behalf of God? Here are the causes between your brethren. Okay, so brethren is all the Israelites. Judge righteously between a man and his brother. Okay, so two people. The word brother doesn't necessarily mean blood brother. It can mean, someone with whom we have a tribal connection. Tribesmen is maybe a word we would use. So judge righteously between them, and the stranger that is with him. And so in this case, it could be the stranger who is with an Israelite. It could be that, it's the Israelite and sort of two plaintiffs or two defendants or whatever the case is. But there's this idea that a stranger is also involved. And the stranger is essentially a resident alien. It's a non-Israelite who lives within the Israelite camp. So, what does some of this mean? Well, Sarah says no whining. Okay, so that's fantastic. I agree completely. What does it say? I would ask this question. What's the social standing among the Israelites? That it says here that we have to hear the causes. If we were judges, we'd have to hear the causes between our brethren, to judge righteously, and to judge the stranger within this same sort of cloak. And I'll actually skip ahead one more verse. You shall not respect persons in judgment. So what does that sound like? Does that sound like anything? Sarah makes the comment, this is remarkably progressive. I thought so as well. It's pretty shocking, actually, that the Torah would say this. Because there's often a lot of times in the Torah where things seem very backwards and very antiquated. So I would sort of make the comment that what this is doing is that it's very egalitarian. And by that I mean it's really making no distinction between who is someone who has more money, more power, things like that. So this to me is really a bold statement for its time. The idea that, we are all brethren, essentially, we are all Israelites, and the non-Israelite is also included within our system of justice, and that we have to treat everybody equally within this system. Now, what does it mean to treat people equally, right? So that's the next question. So verse 17 here says, you shall not respect persons in judgment. So respecting persons, it doesn't mean respect like I'll be kind to you. It means respect in the sense of you should not take into account who the person is and what they are like. So I'll read that again. It means not to take into account who the person is or what they are like. Now, let's compare that to the, U.S. legal system, let's say. What does that sound shocking at all? That we shouldn't take into, we shouldn't regard a person in terms of who they are, where they stand, and things of that nature. Is that true in our legal system? Is it not true? What do you think? Anne makes a great point. We're not supposed to show favoritism. Absolutely. But in our system today, are we respecters of persons? Do we take into account who a person is when we judge them in the court of law? Do we take into account what they're like, perhaps? And Sarah makes the comment that it's supposed to be true in our legal system, so perhaps maybe we don't at times. I guess if you've had more run-ins with the law, you might start to feel like, it's completely unfair, right? But I want to point out, that it's not this like sort of conspiratorial thing about respecting persons. Respecting persons means not taking into account who someone is and things of that nature. And Anne makes another comment here that how much can a person spend on an attorney, that may get them off, things like that. Charles makes a great point. In our legal system, the rich are treated differently, but that's not the way it looks on paper. Okay, absolutely. But I want to take this a step further, that it's not necessarily a money thing. I mean, that's definitely true, right? I mean, we know that if you can get a better judge, you have more legal power behind you than someone who maybe has a public defender. But I'd actually like to look at this differently, which is, what about the idea of a character witness? Is that perhaps fair or unfair in the context of Torah law? So let me give an example of that. We're dealing with a case where someone says, so-and-so robbed me. Okay, well, we don't have proof, but then we bring in a bunch of people who say, well, there's no way this guy could have robbed him. He's a saint. He's a great guy. He feeds matzo ball soup to the elderly on Sundays or whatever, right? Like, this guy's a great guy. There's no way, that he could have done this. Or Reverend so-and-so. There's no way Reverend so-and-so could have stolen that money because he's a man of God, right? So it's an interesting question then, and we will naturally say, there's no way he could have done that, right? This has got to be a false accusation. Does that jive with the Torah, though? And Sarah says no, because that would be judging according to the person. And so, yeah, absolutely. Here we're seeing that this is judging according to the person. This is assuming that a person, because of their station in life, would never do such a thing. And Rebecca, made the point of actually saying, yeah, it's character witnesses to attest to someone's normal behavior. But is normal behavior what you're there to judge? And from a Torah standpoint, no, you're not there to judge normal behavior. Behavior is not even taken into account. It's what happened. Did this person do something? And if they did, do they deserve a punishment? Now, I'm going to talk at the end of this on how this kind of evolved, because it sort of went in a different direction than this particular text tells us. But that is the idea. We're not supposed to respect who a person is in terms of a judgment. Okay. Next line. You shall hear the small and the great alike. So I'm going to rephrase that. You shall hear the small cases and the great cases alike, or the big cases. Big cases, small cases, you have to hear them. Okay? So what's the plain meaning of that? I'm going to read it one more time. And what I mean by the plain meaning is, what's the obvious meaning? And everyone at OneShul is terrible at this, because everyone thinks so deeply that you'll be like 10 steps ahead of where I'm going with this. So what's just the plain meaning? You shall hear the small and great cases. What does that mean? What's the simple way of rewording that? What are we being commanded to do? You shall hear the small and the great cases. Tamara says, judge everyone fairly. It's true. I mean, that's been the context of this whole thing. Here we go. So the minor and major, and James makes a great point. All cases should have equal significance. Okay? So, in this particular legal system, you don't have the lower court and the major court and the appellate court and family law and civil law and corporate law and religious law and whatever. It's all the same thing. And so that's very different than our system, because our system is more bureaucratic. Our system, and by bureaucratic, I mean systematic. We've set up different kinds of courts. As an example, there are drug courts. There are courts that only hear drug cases. There are family courts, family law cases dealing with custody and divorce and child abuse, things of that nature. So what it means for these things to be alike is that you have one set of judges, all cases go through them, and that's the way it's going to be. We're not going to divide up the legal system based on the perceived greatness or lesser of a case. So you don't have something like small claims court, because there are no small claims in this type of environment. So very interesting case there. I mean, imagine for a moment if, some huge case is treated the same way that something on the People's Court would be treated. Right? I mean, it's kind of shocking to think of it that way. But this was, of course, very possible back then, because you only had a certain number of cases, which is the first thing. There were less people, and also an interesting point about tribal life that is different than what we have now. Take, for instance, the idea of stealing someone's shovel. Okay? So you want to dig a well. You go to your neighbor's house, and or his tent, as the case would be, and you steal his shovel. You walk over to your house, and you start digging your well. Okay? What's going to happen? Your neighbor's going to discover that his shovel is missing, and he's going to look over at your tent, and he's going to see that you have his shovel. And it's going to be pretty obvious. There's not a whole lot of places that you can hide that shovel. So the need for all of this complex legal systems comes from the idea of bigger cities and bigger towns, where people are more dispersed, where people don't all necessarily know each other. So it kind of makes sense that you would only have one court, right? Because the likelihood of crime is going to be different. You're going to have less sort of property theft and things like that. What you're going to have are things like crimes of passion, crimes of revenge, things of that nature. And that's why if you look at Torah law, so much of the what we might call civil law revolves around murder and adultery and these sort of really big things. You don't have a ton of really small stuff because petty crime wasn't really possible back then. And because you had fewer people, and because everyone was a part of the same system, Jew and non-Jew alike, you all went to the same court. It made perfect sense. It's like living in a small town. Same exact idea. Okay, here's the next line. You shall not be afraid of the face of any man, for the judgment is God's. So what could this mean? I found two meanings, and if you can find more meanings, that'd be awesome. I'll read it again. You shall not be afraid of the face of any man, for the judgment is God's. You shall not be afraid of the face of any man, for the judgment is God's. What could that possibly mean? Tamara says you don't have to fear anyone. Absolutely. Absolutely. Why would we not fear anyone? Because the judgment is God's. But what does it mean to fear? What does it mean to fear any man? Sarah makes the comment, it doesn't matter who you're judging. Okay, so why does it not matter who you're judging? And so there's two perspectives we can look at it. Let's look at it from the perspective of us judging a person and trying to come up with what the judgment needs to be. And then let's also think about the aftermath of that decision. Okay? So there's two parts. We have to make a decision, so we're looking at this person while we decide their fate. And then the opposite side is we make a judgment, and what happens next. So from that perspective, I'll read it again. You shall not be afraid of the face of any man, for the judgment is God's. Sarah says, because God is the judge of all. Absolutely. So God judges all people. We are all under God's law in this particular theological perspective. I think that it has sort of two parts to it. One is the idea that when someone comes in, we don't have to fear our right to judge them, right? Because they are using up the legal system. We should not be afraid of the face of any man, for God is the true judge. We should not be afraid that whatever we do is going to be incorrect. We're going to make the best decision that we possibly can. And that's that, right? And then it's going to be up to God later. Now, what's the retribution? We should not be afraid to make a decision because we should not be afraid of individuals. If we make a decision, God is going to protect us. So it's a two-way street. The judgment itself is a safe judgment to make because you're going to make it in a righteous way, in a knowledgeable way, in a way of understanding. And at the same time, there's no reason to fear retribution because you're doing holy work and God is going to protect you. So it's a two-way street. It's almost like blanket immunity. The righteousness of what you are doing is the blanket immunity. Charles makes the comment, and if you are judged by a man, it is not final or official judgment. That's left up to Hashem. So, absolutely. The idea is that in the end, even if you did make a mistake, it's all going to end up working out in the end. So that's what that theology is. It's a very future thinking theology, which is very different than other theologies that have been presented. There are times in the Torah where everything is about what happens right now. And this is saying, okay, you know what, it is about what happens right now, but then there's this other element. And there's this other element of justice that comes in. So very interesting here. Okay, the next line. And if the cause is too hard for you, you shall bring it unto me, which is who is Moses, and I will hear it. So there are no layers to the court. There's no different court systems. And what we're left with instead in this legal system is a final judgment. Now, although we don't have layers of court, we do have sort of layers of judgment. So we have the idea of judges. Okay, these are the people that are the heads of the heads of the tribes, the wise, learned people. They see all the cases and they render a judgment. And we know that God is part of this. And we know that God will always exist, right? And we know that judges will always exist. There's a middle component, though. There's one other person here that's being talked about. And who is this other person? Who is this other person that's going to judge these cases? Moshe, bingo. So Moshe is the third piece, right? So think of a triangle, okay, or a tripod, depending on how you want to look at it. It's a tripod that stands on three legs. So the three legs are judges, God, and Moses. Is there a problem with that in the long term? Is there a problem, particularly when you consider what Deuteronomy is, what Devarim is? Is there a problem with the idea of Moses being the third leg of the legal tripod? And the answer is, Sarah says, Moses will die. Okay, great. So that's a huge problem, right? What do we do? Does anyone have a sense of what happens when Moses dies? Like, who's going to take on that third leg? And I don't necessarily mean Joshua, who's the next guy in line, but let's talk about over history. Let's talk about thousands of years in the future. Who's going to play that role? Does anyone have a sense for who that person is going to be, that Moses personality? Who are God and the judges going to rely on to be that extra person who can try those cases and can be that sort of wise counsel? I'll give you a hint. We have the Tanakh, so Torah is the Ta, and then we have Ketuvim, writings. Okay, that's the Ka. What's the Na part? So we got it. So prophets. Okay, so the prophets are the third wheel. So it's God, people, and prophets, and that's what makes up this sort of third leg. And you could almost argue that the Torah itself is divided like that, that the Torah is God, and that the middle part is, writings, and or prophets, and then writings. So you can make that argument as well. So what ultimately everything stands on is Torah, right? Because God, prophets, and I can't even talk, judges. It's all that same area. It's all of those things all in one place. Because the way that the judges would have rendered decisions was through written Torah, right? They would have been knowledgeable in Torah. So the Tanakh, 3 parts. We have the 3 parts of justice, but because we don't have that immediate sense of God being with us all the time, we don't have the Shekhinah, we don't have the temple, we've lost part of that. We don't have a Sanhedrin, we don't have judges, so we're missing that part. But the part that we do have is Torah, and that's what continues to be the basis of judgment. And it makes sense, because look at what comes after Torah. We have an oral tradition, which we then write down. Because we learn that through the process of writing, we can capture the essence of that true judgment, that pure judgment. Now, whether it was true, that it was that pure and it was that great, or if it was just sort of seeing through rose-colored glasses, that's possible as well. But nonetheless, that's why this idea of the book and being the people of the book instead of the people of the prophets or the people of the kings or the people of Genesis or whatever the case is, the people of the desert or the temple or whatever the case is, we're the people of the book, because there is a knowledge there that in this tripod still exists. And that's where the judges rest today. They rest in that place of Torah. And if you look at the way that the Jewish people have managed to survive, it's through codification. It's through rabbinic Judaism. It's through legal precedent. Now, there's people that would argue against that. There's people that would say that we live in a post-halakhic time, a post-Torah Judaism law time. There's people who would say that we should, in fact, conserve Jewish law, but we should take it in terms of modernity. There's people who would say that Jewish law was never actually divine law, that it was something that came together as a result of folkways. There's a lot of different ways that we can approach this idea of written word. And depending on the type of person you are and kind of what your way of viewing the world is like and your way of viewing Judaism is like, you're going to make those decisions on your own. You're going to decide whether the oral tradition came down from Sinai and that all of the poskim and all of the writings of all the Talmudic sages are in fact Torah law in the same way that the written Torah is. And that's going to be your decision. And we're a pluralistic community, so we invite everybody, right? So the point that I want to get across, though, is that people think of halacha and they think of Jewish law as being this stifling thing, right? It's all about the things you can't do. When we think about Shabbat, maybe if we sort of turn it into a polemic, or maybe we turn it into propaganda, we would think of Shabbat as being, it's all about rest. It's all about sleeping. It's all about not doing anything. It is the day of rest. Okay, hopefully that's the way we view it. But more often than not, if you're really deeply thinking about being Shomer Shabbat, you're not thinking about the joy of not doing anything. You're thinking about the difficulty of not getting to do anything, right? It's difficult to not flip a light switch on and off. It's very difficult to not cook something. It's difficult to walk somewhere instead of driving. You could even make the argument that it's more work to drive or to walk than it is to drive. And there are some people who go to very big extremes in order to make that work as much as possible. In Orthodox communities, you have the idea of the Eruv. So you have essentially this boundary made out of string or cable that runs around a community. It's like a border, so that you can walk and you can carry on Shabbat in that area. There are people who have specially modified technology so that they can turn on a lamp, so that they can use a phone, so they can use an elevator, all of these other things on Shabbat. And the point is that people want to live their lives in accordance with something. You know, maybe you don't go all the way into every letter of the law and true ultra-orthodoxy. I mean, really going as far as possible. But to be Jewish, you do at least take it into account, right? No one is ever Jewish and acts as though they have no knowledge of anything, right? Even in sort of silly things, like Jews know we don't eat shrimp. We know we don't eat pork. We know that there are some kinds of prohibitions on Shabbat. Maybe we don't know what those are, but we know you're not supposed to do them, right? So we still think about it. So this idea of justice and judgment and written law, as antiquated as it sounds, it's actually quite relevant today because it's something that we still cling to. It's something we still think about. It's still something that matters to us. So, are there any questions, anything like that? Because I have one other piece to all of this judgment stuff that I want to talk about. Any questions on anything that we have talked about so far? And saying no is also an appropriate answer. Otherwise, I'm going to sit here and wait until someone says something. And I'm going to take off my wrist thing. Getting carpal tunnel. Okay. So, everyone's with me so far. You got it? Okay. So, let's talk about judgment. What's the worst thing that can happen to you if you are judged guilty for certain kinds of crimes? What's the worst thing that the judges would have pronounced upon you if you had violated the law? As an example, picking up sticks on Shabbat. There's a very popular story about that in the Torah. What's the worst thing that the judges are going to have done to you for violating Torah law? No one seems to know. What's the worst thing? Thrown out of a community? Well, maybe. I have one that's a little bit more severe in mind. Death. Death is the worst possible thing that can happen to you. And the death penalty is throughout the Torah, right? There's all kinds of reasons why a person should be put to death, right? Okay. So it sounds pretty severe, right? I mean, the death penalty is one of these things that's sort of, we think about today. I mean, and some of us think of it as the right thing to do. We'll look at the Torah and we'll say, okay, well, the Bible says it's okay, so we should do it. There are some of us who would maybe look at those same passages and say, well, no, it's cruel and wrong. Okay, but the thing about it is, this is where the Sanhedrin and the Mishnah actually comes in very, very handy. Because when we think of death penalty, we think of something that is just done in this very sort of fundamentalist, right-wing, very erratic way. Like a person is found guilty, and so you throw them out in the courtyard and you start throwing rocks at their heads. In Western culture, death penalty in religion tends to be brought up in the context of Christianity, right? And so Jewish people, we have this thing about the Sanhedrin, because we've heard the story of Jesus and how the Sanhedrin pronounced his death penalty, and how we are all sinners because of this, and all of these other things. So we have this very negative image of the Sanhedrin. But the thing about it is, the Sanhedrin actually tried as best as possible to never have the death penalty. They were obsessed with basically writing it out of the law as best as they could. So, how did they do that? Well, the way in which they did it is that they created so many conditions for deciding if a person had committed a crime that it made it impossible for them to be truly guilty. So the way they did it is that they had to have independent witnesses. So let's do a little role-playing game. So I am walking down the street, and I decide I'm going to kill the guy that's right in front of me, right? Like, he's a bad guy, I don't like him, he's gone, okay? I have committed murder. What it would take for me to get the death penalty is 2 independent eyewitnesses. Is that possible? Sure, it's possible that there would be 2 independent eyewitnesses. I'm walking down the street, I kill this guy, and there's one guy over in his field, and then there's another guy milking his cow. They see me. Okay, those are your 2 independent witnesses. Now, they're independent in the sense that they don't know each other. This is a very tricky thing to accomplish back then. Why? Why would it have been tricky to have 2 independent witnesses who are not involved with each other? Does anyone have a sense for why that would be so difficult? Small community. Bingo, you got it. It's a small community. How could you have not been involved with other people? You live right across the street from each other. You possibly live in the same home with each other. It would have been impossible. But we're just going to assume. We're going to assume that these 2 independent people don't know each other. Let's say they both moved into town the exact same day and they haven't shook hands yet because they're jerks. Okay. They see me commit the murder. Okay, that should seem like it's enough. They saw me do it. I've got the weapon, the whole deal, right? And they don't know each other. There's something that's missing, though. What's missing is that they both have to warn me. They both have to warn me that I am committing a crime. So, I'm walking down the street. I find the guy. I'm about to kill him. It requires both of them to say, we warned him. And he did it anyway. Now, on top of that, I have to acknowledge that I agree that it's murder. Okay? So that's another step on top of it. So, I'm walking down the street. I'm committed to murdering someone. I murder him. 2 independent witnesses have both told me not to murder the guy, that it is murder, that I will get the death penalty. I decide I don't care. I kill the guy. Do I get the death penalty at that point? Does that seem right? I mean, I've fulfilled all of the, all of the requirements, right? I acted in, true conscience, killed the guy. I knew that I wasn't supposed to. 2 independent eyewitnesses saw the event, both warned me that I wasn't supposed to do it. I proclaimed that I was going to do it. I killed the guy. That seems like murder. That seems like it violates the 10 Commandments, right? Do I get the death penalty at that point? What does everyone think? Let's just do a quick poll online. Yes or no? Do I get the death penalty at this point? And you can guess. It doesn't even have to be an educated answer. Will I get the death penalty? Tamara says no. Okay. Anyone else want to chime in? Sarah says there's still a catch. James says no. Sounds like legal loopholes. Okay. Does anyone know? So the answer is no. I would not get the death penalty. Does anyone who answered no know why I wouldn't get the death penalty? I'm going to review one more time while you give your answer. And if the answer is I don't know, that's just as good an answer as anything else. Again, one more time. I kill the guy. 2 independent witnesses who don't know each other have both told me that I can't kill that guy, that is murder. He's not, he's not a criminal. He's coming into town to destroy the temple or anything like that. Like this isn't some criminal who is deserving of the death penalty or something like that. He's an innocent man. I'm being told by 2 independent witnesses I can't do that. I say I'm going to do it anyway. I kill the guy. Does anyone know why I don't deserve the death penalty, even though it really sounds like I do? The answer is quite amazing. The answer is because in the minds of the Sanhedrin, if you were so enraged that you would kill someone and had two independent, as Sarah says, not blood-related relatives, or not blood-related people who don't know each other, I kill the guy, I'm being told not to kill the person. The reason why is that the Sanhedrin felt if I would go to that much trouble and I would say that I knew it was murder and that I was going to do it anyway, that I was insane. And if I was insane, I am not fit to be put to death because it is not my fault. And that's the way the Sanhedrin dealt with it. The Sanhedrin honestly felt like if you could go through all of those circumstances and still kill someone, I mean, if you had every single one of these impossible situations line up, and you would still commit murder, you are obviously mentally ill and can't be judged the same way that everyone else is. Pretty interesting, huh? Sort of puts a new light on the Sanhedrin, who we sort of look at as being these tough, brutish, fundamentalist, backwards people, right? That was actually a very enlightened approach. And it's very enlightened in the sense that if you look at the plain meaning of justice in the Torah, you're going to have a lot of death. You're going to have a lot of death penalty. So what the Sanhedrin in the Mishnah does is it actually humanizes the earlier laws. And that's a pretty powerful thing. So, I want to thank everyone for coming to tonight's class. We have some exciting things going on, so don't leave yet. I want to tell you about what's going on. This Sunday, this is a big deal, folks. This Sunday, July 29th, 2012, at 8 p.m., we are having a Tisha B'Av closing service. So, Tisha B'Av is a holiday. It's a day of mourning, actually. And what we're doing is it's recounting our sorrow at the loss of the temple. So, what does that mean today? I think for a lot of people, the idea of the temple, 70 CE, all of that stuff, doesn't really mean much. Why should we mourn the loss of the temple? Would we even want the temple to come back if that was to happen? Well, what we're going to do here at OneShul is we're going to look at the idea of lamentations. So, we're supposed to grieve for Tisha B'Av, for the temple. And what we're going to do instead, or including rather, is probably the better way of saying it, is that we're going to lament for those things that have happened in our past, which make us grieve. So our ancestors grieved on Tisha B'Av for the loss of the sacred temple. So what we're going to do is we're going to include our own lamentations, our own things that bring us down, our own things that every year we seem to just get really depressed about. They're the things that get in our way of happiness and fulfilling what God's purpose is for us. And everyone has these. Everyone has something from their past, just like the Jewish people have things from our past. We have the Holocaust, we have the destruction of the temple, we have assimilation, we had the Inquisition, we had all of these things which got in our way. And we lament all of these things. So what we're going to do is we're going to submit our own lamentations. You can submit as many as you want. So Tamara, people can submit as many as they want. What you're going to do is you're going to submit your lamentations. So it can be something like, I grieve for the loss of someone that I love. I grieve for the fact that I was never able to accomplish XYZ goal. I grieve for the loss of a business. I grieve for the loss of a child, for an education that I never got, for a bad marriage, for whatever it is, whatever that thing is that's in your past that you just can never shake. And that's what Tisha B'Av is. It's a moment that happened in history that we just can't shake. So if you have a moment like that in your life, and everyone does, everyone has had at least one moment like that, go on the OneShul prayer list. So you'll see above prayer requests. You can also click on the link that's in the chat room here. And you fill out the little form there. It's totally anonymous. No one will know that it's you unless you request to be acknowledged, and you don't have to. And I want you to write about what are the things that you lament. What are the things in your past that you can't shake? And what we're going to do is we're going to read those lamentations alongside the traditional liturgy. So what we're going to do is we're connecting our personal everyday suffering with the suffering that happened in 70 CE. So we are creating essentially this time chain between the past and the present through providing our own lamentations for the liturgy. Now, you don't have to be super specific. You don't have to say your name. You don't have to list names of people and, things like that. You can be as vague and cryptic as you want to be. That's fine. But please submit those. This is a healing process for our community. One thing that I have learned as the result of being the director of OneShul is that we all suffer, and we all have personal pain, and we all have things that we're going through, and it feels like no one's paying attention. We feel like we don't matter. And I'm here to tell you that you do matter. You matter more than you know you matter. And so please participate in this because, number one, you may find some healing from it, and that's a wonderful thing. But number two, it could be that there are people who are just so shell-shocked by something bad that happened to them that they can't even type what happened. You think of the horrible things that happen to people. Victims of war, victims of abuse, things like that, who they can't even summon up the courage to write down what's happened to them. Write down what happened to you, those things that you struggle with, no matter how drastic and grave, or what some people might think is small. And there's no such thing as small suffering. All suffering is big. But write down what that is. Share that, because that will actually empower other people to heal who aren't able to put to words those types of things that have happened. And again, it's totally anonymous. I won't know. No one will know who submits what. So please submit that through the prayer wall, and we're going to read those on July 29th, 8 p.m. The event is called Recounting Your Sorrows, a Tisha B'Av service. And there's more information on Facebook. Please friend us on Facebook so you can stay in touch. We have the email list. We have all kinds of ways that you can stay in touch with events. And please tell your friends, tell your family, let people know about this service. Tisha B'Av is one of those services that people don't go to. They don't go to the synagogue. They don't get involved in independent minyanim because it doesn't seem like it's relevant. But it's incredibly relevant. And it's incredibly relevant because it's about suffering that happened in the past and our continued suffering today. Not in this kind of, Holocaust way or this kind of, corporal or corporate, Jewry, us suffering as a people. It's about individual level things. So, please get involved with that. All right. We're always looking for volunteers to lead classes and services. You don't have to have a ton of Jewish knowledge or Jewish experience. We are a pluralistic community, so it doesn't matter if you're Orthodox or secular or whatever term you want to put on yourself. And by the way, labels are for shirts, they're not for people. You can get involved. The biggest comment that I hear from people is, I'm just not smart enough. Well, you are. I'm telling you right now, you are. And if you don't think you're smart enough Jewishly, all you have to do is read from the Siddur, and it's mostly English or it's transliterated. So you can do it, I promise. Also, it costs $120 a month to run OneShul, so please donate. There are about 12 people who are here tonight. If every person gave $10 tonight, then we would be able to fund OneShul for the month. And folks, it's very, very important. It costs $100 for the streaming video. It costs $20 for the chat room. That doesn't even include all the other website stuff. So please give. I'm going to post the link here. You can give via PayPal. You can also give a snail mail donation, $10. $10 from each person here tonight will be able to fund OneShul for a month. If you can give more than 10, give as much as you can, because it's very, very important. We're the only community of its kind, and we need to grow. We need to let people know who we are. We need to let people know that we love them and care about them, and that God loves them and God cares about them, and we need to share that with people. So if you're on board and you want that to happen, if you believe in community, if you believe in what we're doing here, please donate. Please share our Facebook, share our website on your Facebook or Twitter. Email your friends, email your family. Not everyone's social media oriented, but you know what? If you've got 5 people, you can email and just say, hey, here's the link to OneShul. You might be interested. Hey, here's a link to the Tisha B'Av service. Why don't you observe it online with me? I tell you, folks, 5 lives that could be inspired by OneShul, I'm up for it. I know I would love it. So again, thank you so much for coming. I have a custom that I stay in the chat room after the class to answer any questions or comments. So I will be online. I just won't be broadcasting. Please feel free to stay in the chat room to chat with me. If you want to Skype, if you want to talk on the phone, we can do that as well. I'm available to you until 10 o'clock Eastern Time. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you Sunday, 8 p.m. for our Tisha B'Av service.